So my research was in permissibility of organ donation, specifically in Shia jurisprudence. The reason why I stuck to jurisprudence is because of the framework that we exist in right now. It is the jurist or the mujtahid who has the ultimate authority. And so although really questions like the definition of death should be more theosophical or philosophical, actually it's just dealt with by jurists under the term medical jurisprudence. Yeah, I'm also not very good at these and I have no excuse. I won't go through the statistics because that's already been mentioned and also you're all doctors, so. One of the things that did come up though at Great Ormond Street Conference on children and organ donation in Islam is that children of ethnic minorities or children from Muslim backgrounds are more likely to have congenital heart defects and require heart transplantation. But Muslim families are less likely to donate hearts or any organs after death. Yeah. In certain areas, this results in really lengthy waiting times. For example, in areas where there's a lot of Muslims, like Birmingham, the wait can be up to 4 or 5 years. And in addition, it's very burdensome on the NHS, which has to provide other treatments like dialysis. The surveys of British Muslims show that although they feel they are pro-organ donation, they actually think it's not allowed in their religion, and that's what bars them from becoming organ donors. Yeah. And so, as an overview, living organ donation and deceased organ donation are treated completely separately in jurisprudence. Living organ donation has always been sanctioned. So you can donate organs as long as it doesn't cause you serious harm or result in death. And also for the Shia fuqaha, they've also allowed the sale of organs, and which is why in Iran they do regulate the sale of kidney donation. From what I've read, Sunni jurists do not allow this at all and are completely against it. On the flip side, deceased organ donation has been far more contentious in jurisprudence. This is because of 3 hurdles. The first is the problem in defining death. Is it to do with when the heart stops irreversibly, or is it to do when the brain stops? The second issue is to do with the violation of the sanctity of the deceased. The dead body is supposed to have greater sanctity than even the living person, and so can you at that point cut out organs? And the third problem is the religion of the recipient, and this isn't a problem that exists in living organ donation. So whilst you're alive, you can donate organs regardless of who it goes to, but once you die, for the majority, you can only donate it if it's necessary to save the life of another Muslim. The majority of the jurists say that organ donation is allowed after death if it's necessary to save the life of a Muslim, and some even say that it's necessary to take the organ if you need it to save the life of a Muslim, even if there's no will or consent. The definition of death has changed, as we've already been through. So from the Islamic perspective, the Quran and Sunnah don't provide any definition for death. They just speak of it in a metaphysical way. So when the ruh, or when the spirit departs from the body, that is what is known as death. And although there are some physical signs that have been given in traditions, like when the skin becomes white or the muscles begin to slacken, they don't really provide any kind of definition. But nonetheless, for the majority of jurists, from their fatwas, it seems that they still don't regard brain death as being true death in Islam. Yeah. And although this is a big point, it's not discussed in detail very often in jurisprudential thought. One problem from, I think, Ayatollah Sanad is the skepticism that it's only being pushed because of utilitarian considerations, so only because you can take the organs to save other people's lives, or you can switch off machines so it's not costly to keep them alive. They're skeptical about this. The other main argument, and this is I've read across the board in Sunni and Shia literature, is that there's an uncertainty regarding brain death, and so there's a principle of continuity, which is that certainty cannot be undermined by doubt. So if there is a person who is brain dead, you don't know for sure if they're dead, so you continue with the principle of istishab. And someone even says, well, things can change, so we might even find a way to reverse brain death, and I think there's a company that's already working on that, a biotech in Philadelphia. My issue with the principle of istishab here is that we have no real understanding of death, and already we're trying to push the boundaries. So there's people who believe in cryonics who say that a person isn't dead once their heart or brain stops beating because all the information is still there. So as long as you just freeze them, in the future you can unfreeze them at some point. So if you start taking these definitions of death, even then people are still not dead, and then you have to start freezing people. Also, there's a person who did a head transplant, who is attempting to do a head transplant in December, which I think probably didn't go through because otherwise I would have heard about it. But he did transplant the head of a dog, and he also, I think, put the head, two heads of rats onto one body, and they said it could feel. So there are already these things happening. So if you're going to go with istishab, then you have to push it the whole way because you don't have any certainty regarding any definition of death, which is why that principle perhaps isn't the strongest here. Aside from istishab, you have Ayatollah Sistani, who relies on urf, which is custom, and he says that, well, it's not death. Brain death cannot be true death because... Can I drink this? Brain death cannot... Sorry. Brain death is not true death because ordinary people do not consider it to be death. This is somewhat of an unusual stance because ordinary people don't really know much about death. So if they did studies to find that people didn't really understand what brain death meant, and they were confused between brain death and other neurological disorders. And also I was speaking to one of the transplant nurses, and she said when people refuse to let people come off life support when they are brain dead, they invite them to see the test, and once they see the test, so they switch off, I think, the ventilator, and once they see that, then they're much more likely to agree to it. And so the idea is that the common common understanding will change over time, and it's usually informed by the medical opinion anyway, and at the moment it's just informed by misunderstanding. As opposed to this, many notable jurists have already deferred to medical specialists, so they rely on a more specialist urf, which is that of the doctor, saying that the doctors are best placed to make this decision. Ayatollah Khomeini is recognized as the first Muslim jurist across the board to recognize this and to allow the procurement of organs at this point. Even if organ donation at the point of brain death is not allowed, it's still a question because you can also donate some organs after cardiac death. So even for those who don't allow it at this point of brain death, there's still a question of whether it's allowed at all. The primary problem with organ donation after death is that there's a variety of narrations which talk about the sanctity of the dead body. They say that the dead body has a greater sanctity than the living person, and that to harm a dead person is even worse than harming a living person. And there's many, many narrations which prohibit mutilation of a corpse. This then brings into question that can organ donation in a medical setting really be considered mutilation or not? For the minority, like Ayatollah Fadlullah, he says that mutilation has a connotation of revenge or punishment, and so organ donation doesn't come into that at all. And here you look at the context in which...
I just wanted a quick question. That second point, where is it quoted from?
Which one?
Breaking the bones of a dead Muslim.
I don't have the thing here, but I've got it in my main essay, if I can... Yeah. Oh, but I thought he meant... Yeah.
From Imam Jaffer.
Yeah,
okay.
But they're from quite a few as well. Yeah, oh. Okay, so if you look at the context in which these narrations also came about, you see that mutilation was a prevalent practice in pre-Islamic Arabia, and there's a story in Ibn Ishaq's Life of the Prophet where his uncle's body was mutilated to such an extent, and not only that, women used to go around and they used to cut off ears and noses and make jewelry out of them. And when he saw this, he was so disheartened that from that moment, apparently every place he went, he told people never mutilate a body. So if you take into consideration that context, it would change the understanding of the narration entirely. However, the majority used this hermeneutic principle known as Asada Zuhur, or the principality of the apparent meaning, which means that because the Prophet didn't specifically say don't mutilate the body on a battlefield, it's absolute, and so you can never harm a body. If it says breaking the bones of the dead is worse than breaking the bones of the living, that's not conditional. It doesn't matter what intention you have, it's just absolute. And therefore, for the majority, primarily organ donation is prohibited, although there may be some secondary factors which can override this. The secondary issues is that, well, now you have two conflicting obligations. On the one hand, you're not allowed to violate the sanctity of a dead body or harm it, but on the other hand, you also have an obligation to save the life of a person, or for the majority of the life of a Muslim person. And this obligation, it's in the Quran also, that everyone knows, whoever saves a life, it's as if he saved the whole of mankind. And so you resort to this principle of arranging duties in accordance with their importance, and most people will agree that saving a life is of greater importance than preserving dignity of a dead body. Also, others then go further than saving a life and also say, what about if it's not life-saving, but it just improves the quality of life? Some don't allow this. The likes of Ayatollah Fadlullah say that you have to look at all of the considerations. So if the benefits to the recipient outweighs the harm to the deceased, then you still can donate organs. A consideration here is that we have a publicly funded NHS, so that's a much bigger consideration as well that you have. And therefore, even though it's primarily prohibited, it is allowed because saving a life or improving the life has greater value. Nonetheless, the majority opinion is that it's problematic to donate organs unless it's to a Muslim. And this restriction doesn't apply in life, only after death. For some, even if there's no will or no consent, you still have to take that organ if you need it. And also, this is conditioned that there's no other cadavers available. So I think someone, Ayatollah Mohseni, says that even if you can transport a body from a Kafir land to get organs from a non-Muslim, you have to do that before you can take organs from a Muslim. This is both ethically and legally problematic. There was a case here in 1998 where a Caucasian patient's family said they would only donate organs if it went to other white patients. In that case, the doctors actually took it, and I think they saved 3 lives, and then there was a public outcry, and the Department of Health said that organs are donated altruistically and should go to patients in greatest need. So there's no box that you can tick that it will only go to a Muslim patient. This then means that potentially Muslims will not donate organs, or that they feel that they are not even allowed to donate organs. This has a few ethical problems, for example, equality, and also Sachadina points out that there's a principle of reciprocity, and that's even mentioned in the Quran, that you treat others in the way that they treat you, and that comes up across the board. Even any ordinary person you speak to will say, well, if we can take organs, what reason is there that we can't give them? I tried to find where this actually came from, because usually the idea is that they found something in the Quran or the Hadith or the secondary principles, but this is a aspect that is just not addressed anywhere that I could find at all. They don't present any evidence, it's just there in fatwas. Even speaking to Ayatollah Muhakkik Damad, Sayyid Jaffer Fadlullah, although they both say it's fine to give organs to non-Muslims, they don't know where the opposite idea has come from. It may be that it originated in this paradigm of Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb, where the world was divided into Muslim lands and lands that were antagonistic with Muslims. And there was a sort of well-known saying that the Kafir and his belongings belong to the Muslim, and this is what people acted in accordance with. If this is the case, then you then have questions about, well, does this paradigm still exist or not? The other maybe issue that it raises is about the notion of taqlid as blind imitation. If nobody is giving any reason for it, is it still an obligation to follow blindly, or do you have some discretion there? Because because Ayatollah Fadlullah talks about taqlid not as blind imitation, because this is removed from the rational spirit of Islam. Rather, taqlid is a conscious, considered venture. Moving on, there are a minority who now do allow organ donation to non-Muslims. They make no distinction. Ayatollah Fadlullah says that Islam looks at the humanistic aspect of this, and it's a charitable value, and it doesn't matter who it goes to. The likes of Ayatollah Fadlullah and Ayatollah Sana'i have a different hermeneutic, have a different methodology where they don't look at the apparent meaning of the hadith. They actually look at the ethos of the Quran, and they say that the Quran talks about, and that the rulings have to be formulated in accordance with the egalitarian principles of the Quran. So the Quran speaks about the preservation of life unrestrictedly in the verse that preceded, and it also endows all human beings with dignity, talking about the children of Adam and how they've all been endowed with dignity and all come from one soul. In addition to this, you also have hadith to the same effect, where the Prophet says that all human beings are equal like the teeth of a comb, and Imam Ali, who says that people are either your brothers in faith or your equal in humanity. Another consideration here, not based on this, which apparently is why Ayatollah Khamenei changed his view, is based on the notion that it gives Islam a very bad name, and that's one of the secondary considerations that can be used sometimes to override rulings. So especially living in a Western country where Islam is already under scrutiny, if these things get out that, well, Muslims will only donate to other Muslims, it ruins and tarnishes the image of Islam, and that too is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Just to conclude then, maybe the issue of organ donation in Muslim countries has been settled, but its implication for people living in Islamic or in non-Islamic countries or Western countries is still debatable. So issues, for example, about decontextualized interpretation and specifically giving organs to non-Muslims are ones that have a greater impact here, but these are the issues that are not really discussed. Thank you.